Russia and Belarus will begin joint Air Force drills on Monday, which have triggered fears in Kyiv and the West that Moscow could use its ally to launch a new ground offensive in Ukraine. Minsk says the drills are defensive, and since Moscow used its neighbor as a springboard for its invasion of Ukraine last February, Belarus has conducted numerous military exercises, both on its own and jointly with Russia. Together with Moscow, Minsk has also been bolstering the drills with weaponry and military equipment. Unofficial Telegram military monitoring channels have been reporting a series of fighters, helicopters, and military transport planes coming to Belarus since the start of the year, 8 fighters and 4 cargo planes on Sunday alone. Reuters was not able to verify the reports. The Belarusian Defense Ministry said only that units of Russia's air forces have been arriving in Belarus. The situation on Belarus's southern border, the border with Ukraine, was not very calm, and Ukraine has been provoking Belarus, said Pavel Muravenko, First Deputy State Secretary of Belarusian Security Council, according to a post on the Belarusian Defense Ministry's Telegram app on Sunday. Ukraine has continuously warned of possible attacks from Belarus, and President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week that the country must be ready at its border with Belarus. The Kremlin has denied that it has been pressuring Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to take a more active role in the conflict in Ukraine. Minsk has said it will not enter the war. Ukraine saw little hope of pulling any more survivors from the rubble of an apartment block in the city of Dnipro on Sunday, a day after the building was hit during a major Russian missile attack, with dozens of people expected to have died. The regional governor's advisor, Natalia Babichenko, said 30 people were confirmed dead so far and more than 30 were in hospital, including 12 in a serious condition. Between 30 to 40 people could still be trapped under debris, she said. Emergency workers said they had heard people screaming for help from underneath piles of debris from the 9-story apartment block in the east-central city and were using moments of silence to help direct their efforts. Freezing temperatures added to rescuers' concerns. Ukraine's Air Force said the apartment block was struck by a Russian Kh-22 missile, which is known to be inaccurate, and that Ukraine lacks the air defenses to shoot down. The Soviet-era missile was developed during the Cold War to destroy warships. Russia fired 2 waves of missiles at Ukraine on Saturday, striking targets across the country as fighting raged on the battlefield in the eastern towns of Soledar and Bakhmut. Moscow, which invaded last February, has been pounding Ukraine's energy infrastructure with missiles and drones since October, causing sweeping blackouts and disruptions to central heating and running water. In his nightly address after the Dnipro strike, Zelensky called on Western allies to supply more weapons to end Russian terror and attacks on civilian targets. Western powers are considering sending battle tanks to Kyiv and ahead of a meeting of Ukraine's allies in Ramstein in Germany next Friday, where governments will announce their latest pledges of military support. On Saturday, Britain followed France and Poland with promises of further weapons, saying it would send 14 of its Challenger 2 main battle tanks as well as other advanced artillery support in the coming weeks. The first dispatch of Western-made tanks to Ukraine is likely to be viewed by Moscow as escalation of the conflict. The Russian embassy in London said the tanks would drag out the confrontation. Russia's invasion, which Moscow calls a special military operation, has already killed thousands, displaced millions, and turned many cities into rubble. In Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, the focal point of Russia's drive to capture more territory, Ukraine's forces were battling around the small salt mining town of Soledar. Russian forces claimed to have taken control of the town, but Ukraine insisted on Sunday that its forces were battling to hold the town, with street fighting raging and Russian forces advancing from various directions. The Washington-based Institute for the Study of War said it was highly unlikely that Ukrainian forces still held positions within Soledar itself. Russia struck communities along the border of Ukraine's Sumy Oblast 44 times on January 15, damaging a school and a kindergarten. Russian forces launched attacks at the Bilopilia, Khotin, Seredinabuda, and Krasnopilia communities, Sumy Oblast Governor Dmytro Zhyvytskyyy said on Facebook. According to Zhyvytskyyy, Russia fired 12 mines and dropped 2 explosives from a drone at the Krasnopilia community. Russian forces also shelled the Bilopilia community with mortars 15 times, damaging a school and garage. Seredinabuda and Khotin communities also came under mortar fire. In Kindrativka in the Khotin community, a kindergarten and a school stadium were damaged. The day before, Russian forces shelled 4 border communities in the oblast, injuring an elderly man. Ukraine's northeastern Sumy Oblast is subject to daily shelling and attacks by Russian forces across the border in Russia. 5 Kh-22 cruise missiles were fired from 5 Tu-22M3 long-range Russian bombers during the January 14 mass missile attack. Additional missiles were launched from Russia's Kursk Oblast and the Sea of Azov. One of the Kh-22 missiles, which was launched from Kursk Oblast at about 3:30 p.m. on January 14, hit a high-rise residential building in the city of Dnipro. While Ukrainian radar detected the approximate location of the missile's launch, altitude, and flight speed, it was unable to shoot it down. The armed forces of Ukraine have no firepower capable of shooting down this type of missile, the Air Force said. Since the beginning of Russia's military aggression, more than 210 missiles of this type have been launched at the territory of Ukraine. Not a single one has been shot down by air defense systems. The Kh-22 has a maximum range of up to 600 kilometers, though it can deviate from its planned target by hundreds of meters. Belarus said its Air Force drills with Russia that start on Monday are defensive in nature to prepare for possible combat missions, but the move comes as concerns grow that Moscow is pushing Minsk to join the war in Ukraine. The exercises, which will last until February 1, are to involve training for aerial reconnaissance, deflecting airstrikes, air cover of important objects and communications, Muravenko added. The ongoing buildup of Russian troops in Belarus, combined with a flurry of military activity in the country, is an echo to what was happening there just before Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine, when Moscow used the country as a springboard to launch the attack. This has triggered fears in Kyiv and the West that Russia could use its dutiful ally to mount a new ground offensive on Ukraine. Ukraine has continuously warned of possible attacks from Belarus, and President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week that the country must be ready at its border with Belarus. The Kremlin has denied that it has been pressuring Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to take a more active role in the conflict in Ukraine. Minsk has said it will not enter the war. Since the start of the war, Belarus has conducted numerous military exercises, including large-scale comprehensive drills in late August and a number of smaller ones on its own or jointly with Russia. Together with Moscow, Minsk has also been adding weaponry and military equipment to the drills. Unofficial Telegram military monitoring channels have been reporting a series of fighters, helicopters, and military transport planes coming to the country since the start of the year, 8 fighters and 4 cargo planes on Sunday alone. Reuters was not able to verify the reports. The Belarusian Defense Ministry said only that units of Russia's air forces have been arriving in Belarus. Ukraine endured a wave of strikes on Saturday, including a devastating hit on an apartment block in the city of Dnipro. This latest attack on Ukrainian civilians came as cross-border artillery fire continues to affect northern Ukraine. In areas the Russian army swept into in late February before being driven out a month later, Ukrainian forces have dug extensive trench networks as they brace for a potential renewed ground offensive. France 24's Gulliver Cragg reports. Russian forces left northern Ukraine's Sumy region in late March, but this part of the front line has never really gone quiet. There were 55 strikes on this region in the last 24 hours, including a couple on our sector, said Ukrainian soldier Ensai. They insisted that the bad news from Soledar has not affected their morale. It doesn't mean anything, our guys have shown that they are able to hold the line, but there's no need for people to risk their lives unnecessarily, in my opinion, Vadim said. If we lose Soledar today, we'll get it back the day after tomorrow for sure. Russian President Vladimir Putin was so worried about a conflict with the West that he basically wound up creating one by proxy through his unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, a former U.S. Army general said. Nearly 10 months ago, Putin chose to wage war in Ukraine in part with the mindset that NATO and the U.S. would in turn be afraid of Russia after it quickly achieved victory over the Eastern European country as planned, he said. Putin suffered a major setback in the early days of the war when Russian troops failed to seize the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Ukraine, aided by the US and the West through billions of dollars worth of weapons and equipment, has managed to defend itself from Moscow's aggression and even successfully launched a stunning counteroffensive last year, forcing Russian troops to give up large swaths of occupied territory. The year ahead will be a pivotal one for the war, Ryan previously told Insider, warning that the Kremlin would likely turn to the dire option of nuclear weapons if Moscow faces defeat in the conflict. But Putin didn't get what he wanted, he said. He was hoping to just absorb Ukraine the way he absorbed Crimea in 2014. Ukraine has put up a fierce defense, which is backed by a continuous flow of Western weapons and equipment, which now includes armored vehicles and could soon include tanks. With his attack on Ukraine, Putin has essentially created this reality of the war with the West, he said. He's fighting us through his invasion of Ukraine. The West, according to Ryan, did not initially seem to think it would be in a proxy war with Russia, but since the beginning of the invasion, we are coming to the realization that we are in this war too, even if our soldiers are not dying there. In addition to supplying Ukraine with weapons and equipment, Western nations have hit Russia with severe economic sanctions as punishment for its invasion of Ukraine, choking its economy. President Vladimir Putin said Russia's economy is in better shape than expected. Iran, which has been supplying Moscow with attack drones for months, will take delivery of Russian fighter jets by March, an Iranian lawmaker said. President Volodymyr Zelensky said fighting in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region will be fundamental to defeating Russia. The death toll at a 9-story apartment building in Dnipro climbed to 30 on Sunday after it was hit by what Ukraine's air command said was a Russian long-range anti-ship missile. The Dnipro strike was part of 2 waves on Saturday, mostly targeted at Ukraine's infrastructure. Missile and airstrikes were reported in locations including Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Kryvyi Rih, Dnipro, Vinnytsia. Russian forces launched S-300 and S-400 systems on a ballistic trajectory from Belarus, before later launching cruise missiles from air and sea. Over the past 24 hours, Russia launched the air strikes and 57 missile strikes, and 69 strikes from rocket salvo systems, Ukraine's general staff said. Russia used 300/400 long-range anti-aircraft missiles to carry out missile strikes on Kyiv and other settlements of Ukraine, it said in a daily report, warning that there's still a threat of air and missile strikes throughout Ukraine. At least 7 were injured after Russian mass shelling in Kherson on Sunday, the region's governor said. Among the buildings shelled were an apartment complex and one where the Ukrainian Red Cross was located. Battles in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, including the city of Bakhmut and the salt mine town of Soledar, are continuing without any respite, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Sunday. While Russia has made the battle for the cities of our Donbass fundamental for itself, Ukrainian forces are making this battle fundamental for the destruction of the combat potential of Russia, he said in his nightly video address. The death toll from Russia's missile attack Saturday on an apartment building in Dnipro rose to 30, according to emergency services. At least 72 others were injured and rescue efforts continued on Sunday. Ukraine's Air Command said the building was hit by a Russian Kh-22, or X-22, long-range missile launched from the Kursk region and designed for use against aircraft carriers. Dnipropetrovsk Region Governor Valentin Reznichenko said on Telegram that 72 units in the block were destroyed and 230 others damaged. Kremlin troops have fired more than 210 of the Kh-22 rockets since the start of the invasion, and Ukraine has no firepower capable of shooting down that type of missile, the air command said. Alina Zelenska, the wife of Ukraine's president, told CNN on Sunday that Ukrainians are trying to preserve some sort of normality as Russia's invasion heads toward the 1-year mark. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree on Sunday imposing sanctions against almost 200 people of mostly Russian and Belarusian citizenship. It was the second round of sanctions announced this month. Russia's inflation rate is expected to slow to about 5% in the first quarter from 11.9%, and pointed to growth in industrial production, agriculture, and construction. Putin also said what he terms the special military operation in Ukraine is going according to defense ministry plans and that the dynamics are positive for Russia. Iran will receive a number of Russian Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets by March as part of a military order that includes defense systems, missiles, and helicopters. Shahriar Haidari, a member of the Islamic Republic's Parliamentary Commission for National Security and Foreign Policy, didn't specify the number of aircraft ordered. It's the first substantial move to ease a restrictive law shaped by Switzerland's tradition of neutrality in international affairs. Germany and Spain have criticized the Swiss for blocking ammunition shipments to Ukraine. The maker of Leopard tanks says it would take about a year to get the vehicles it has in inventory ready for the battlefield, meaning deliveries to Ukraine couldn't start before 2024, Rheinmetall CEO Armin Paperger told the Bild newspaper. The German defense company has 22 Leopard 2 tanks and 88 Leopard 1 vehicles, but we can't repair these tanks without an order, because the costs are several hundred million euros and Rheinmetall can't finance that in advance, he said. The comments are likely to put more pressure on the German government to approve deliveries of vehicles in active service. Countries including Poland and Finland have said they're ready to send their Leopards to Kyiv. Gitanas Nausėda, Lithuania's president, called Russia a terrorist state that brings destruction, death and immense suffering everywhere they go. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the attack was despicable, abhorrent, and completely unacceptable. Bridget Brink, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, said Russia was continuing a desperate assault on Ukraine's cities and people. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called for an international strategy to break the stalemate in Ukraine after almost a year of war. The UK has assessed that a window has opened up where Russia is on the back foot due to resupply issues and plummeting morale, and Sunak is encouraging allies to press their advantage as soon as possible. Ukraine's capital, along with much of the country, continues to experience power outages after strikes on critical infrastructure by Russian missiles on Saturday. DTK Power engineers, together with specialists from Ukrenergo, other emergency services and state authorities, are attempting to stabilize the situation. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed late on January 14 the delivery of 14 Challenger 2 tanks and around 30 AS-90 self-propelled 155mm howitzers as part of a major new package of military aid Ukraine. The tank squadron will be delivered to Ukraine in the coming weeks, with the self-propelled artillery following soon after, the UK Prime Minister's office said. Sunak stressed the need for an international strategy to break the stalemate in Russia's war against Ukraine. Equipped with state-of-the-art targeting technology and advanced armor, the Challenger 2 is considered to be superior to the Soviet-era tanks currently operated by both sides in the war. The UK will start training the Ukrainian forces to use the Challenger tanks and guns in the coming days. The nation has already provided basic training to Ukrainian soldiers as part of Operation Interflex, launched in July 2022 and involving instructors from 11 other nations. The UK will also send 4 Apache attack helicopters, armed with Hellfire missiles to Ukraine. The full details of the new UK military aid package will be released on January 16. The announcement comes 4 days after Polish President Andrzej Duda announced the delivery of 12 German-made Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Duda said that the tanks would be delivered as part of a growing international coalition to provide Ukraine with Western-built tanks, with several European nations including Finland signaling their willingness to contribute. Any delivery of German-built Leopard tanks must still be approved by Berlin, which has yet to give an official all-clear. On January 13, Bloomberg reported that Germany would announce its final decision ahead of the next round of the Ramstein Defense Summit on January 20. The 9-story apartment building in Dnipro was hit in a large-scale Russian missile attack on the afternoon of January 14. At least 21 people were killed and another 73 were injured, according to latest reports. According to Ukrainian sources, the strike was conducted via Kh-22 missile launched by a Tu-22M aircraft in Russia's Kursk Oblast. The pilot's call sign is 4249, and the aircraft then landed at an airfield in Russia's Ryazan. Brachek and Sternenko stated that an earlier missile strike was launched against a shopping center in Kremenchuk, Poltava Oblast, on June 27, 2022, by the same Russian commander. At the time, over 20 people were killed and another 30 were reported missing. Ukraine wants more Australian military aid in the wake of a Russian missile strike that killed 30 people. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged allies to send supplies so Ukraine can go on the counterattack, a call answered by the United Kingdom, which will send 14 tanks and other weapons. More than 70 people, including at least 13 children, were rescued from a high-rise residential building hit by a Russian missile in Dnipro on Saturday. Ukraine's ambassador to Australia Vasyl Miroshnichenko said more weapons will be needed to withstand the relentless Russian attacks. Australia has already sent 90 Bushmaster vehicles to Ukraine and 70 Australian Defence Force personnel to the UK to help train Ukraine's soldiers, with total support exceeding $650 million. Mr. Miroshnichenko said any support would be greatly appreciated, with another tranche of Bushmasters to provide vital assistance. A defense representative said the government was committed to delivering its current contribution to Ukraine and would provide a steady flow of military assistance in the coming months. Treasurer Jim Chalmers said Australia had proudly already given Ukraine plenty of support and would continue to assess whether further aid was needed. Save the Children has called for international human rights laws to be upheld and for the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its mandate. Kyiv can expect more deliveries of heavy weapons from Western countries soon, NATO said Sunday, as President Vladimir Putin praised his forces after their claimed capture of a Ukraine town. Washington meanwhile condemned the missile on a tower block in the eastern city of Dnipro, as the death toll rose to 30 as rescue teams kept up the search for survivors. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Ukraine could expect more heavy weapons following Kyiv's requests to its allies for the vehicles, artillery, and missiles it says are key to defending itself. Days after Russia claimed to have taken Soledar in eastern Ukraine, a salt mining outpost home to 10,000 before the conflict, Putin hailed it as a major success. Russia's defense ministry announced this week that it had completed the liberation of Soledar. This could be a key gain as Russian forces push towards what has been their main target since October, the nearby transport crossroads of Bakhmut. Ukraine has denied the Russian claims, insisting that heavy fighting continues in Soledar. Russia's victory there, if that is what it proves to be, follows months of humiliating setbacks. Both sides have conceded heavy losses in the battle for the town. Rescue workers in Dnipro meanwhile continued their search for survivors of the Saturday's missile strike on a tower block that has so far claimed 30 lives. Dozens of people were also wounded in the attack, said regional advisor Natalia Babichenko in televised comments. A 15-year-old girl was among the dead, officials said, after dozens of people were pulled from the rubble, including a woman brought out by rescuers on Sunday. Babichenko said that between 30 and 40 people are still under the rubble. The Ukrainian army said the block was hit by an X-22 Russian missile that it lacked the capacity to shoot down. The United States joined a growing chorus of condemnation for the attack. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pleaded for more Western military weapons, saying that Russian terror could be stopped only on the battlefield. Earlier this month, France, Germany and the United States respectively promised French AMX-10 RC light tanks, 40 German Marder infantry vehicles, and 50 Bradley fighting vehicles. However, pressure is growing on the Allies to go further and agree to the delivery of battle tanks. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on Saturday pledged to provide 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine, making it the first Western country to supply the heavy tanks Kyiv has been calling for. Russia's embassy in Britain warned that bringing tanks to the conflict zone will only serve to intensify combat operations, generating more casualties, including among the civilian population. Ukraine was still reeling Sunday from Saturday's barrage, the 12th wave of large-scale missile attacks. Energy operator Ukrenergo said the infrastructure was being restored, but that the attacks had meant that power cuts might increase. Kyiv can expect more deliveries of heavy weapons from Western countries soon, NATO said Sunday, as President Vladimir Putin praised his forces after their claimed capture of a Ukraine town. Washington meanwhile condemned the missile on a tower block in the eastern city of Dnipro, as the death toll rose to 30 as rescue teams kept up the search for survivors. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Ukraine could expect more heavy weapons following Kyiv's requests to its allies for the vehicles, artillery and missiles it says are key to defending itself. Days after Russia claimed to have taken Soledar in eastern Ukraine, a salt mining outpost home to 10,000 before the conflict, Putin hailed it as a major success. Russia's defense ministry announced this week that it had completed the liberation of Soledar. This could be a key gain as Russian forces push towards what has been their main target since October, the nearby transport crossroads of Bakhmut. Ukraine has denied the Russian claims, insisting that heavy fighting continues in Soledar. But on Sunday, the US-based Institute for the Study of War said that Ukrainian forces are highly unlikely to still hold positions within the settlement of Soledar itself. Russia's victory there, if that is what it proves to be, follows months of humiliating setbacks. Both sides have conceded heavy losses in the battle for the town. Rescue workers in Dnipro meanwhile continued their search for survivors of the Saturday's missile strike on a tower block that has so far claimed 30 lives. Dozens of people were also wounded in the attack, said regional advisor Natalia Babichenko in televised comments. A 15-year-old girl was among the dead, officials said, after dozens of people were pulled from the rubble, including a woman brought out by rescuers on Sunday. Babichenko said that between 30 and 40 people are still under the rubble. The Ukrainian army said the block was hit by an X-22 Russian missile that it lacked the capacity to shoot down. The United States joined a growing chorus of condemnation for the attack. Yesterday's strikes are another example of the brutal and barbaric war Russia is waging against the Ukrainian people, said a U.S. National Security Council spokesperson. On Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pleaded for more Western military weapons, saying that Russian terror could be stopped only on the battlefield. Earlier this month, France, Germany and the United States respectively promised French AMX-10 RC light tanks, 40 German Marder infantry vehicles, and 50 Bradley fighting vehicles. However, pressure is growing on the Allies to go further and agree to the delivery of battle tanks. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on Saturday pledged to provide 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine, making it the first Western country to supply the heavy tanks Kyiv has been calling for. Ukraine was still reeling Sunday from Saturday's barrage, the 12th wave of large-scale missile attacks. Energy operator Ukrenergo said the infrastructure was being restored, but that the attacks had meant that power cuts might increase. Russian strikes had hit civilian and critical infrastructure, including Red Cross premises and a center for disabled children, he said. Russia's army said it targeted the military command and related energy facilities. All targets were reached. As fighting continues in eastern Ukraine, the United Kingdom's government has confirmed that it will be the first NATO country to supply its ally with Western tanks. A squadron of 14 tanks called the Challenger 2 will deploy to the conflict in the coming weeks. The Challenger 2 is what's called a main battle tank, or MBT, and it's specifically designed to attack other tanks and armored vehicles, seen here during NATO exercises 2 years ago. President Zelensky has long pleaded with allied countries to include their tanks in aid packages, but some Western officials have been cautious over the concern that Russia or even China could get their hands on advanced Western military technology. Moscow is also likely to see the introduction of Western tanks onto the battlefield as an escalation of the war, and NATO is desperate not to be drawn more directly into it. The Challenger 2 has been in service with the British Army since 1994 and has been deployed to Bosnia, Iraq, and other crises. The UK's gift could put added pressure on other NATO countries, particularly the US and Germany, to give their own tanks, which have so far resisted. Along with the Challenger 2, Britain is also giving Ukraine about 30 artillery vehicles called the TES-90. It will take time to train Ukrainian forces on how to use the British tanks and artillery, and Russia's London embassy is dismissing the development. The embassy says the Challengers are unlikely to turn the tide of the war, will drag it out, and will be targeted by Russia's own forces.